Hello and welcome to a Firstpost POV. We could be watching history unfold in Japan because over the weekend, the country's ruling party, the LDP, elected its first ever female leader, Sanae Takaichi. Now, if things go according to plan, then Takaichi will also become the country's first ever female prime minister. Now, this is a big deal in Japan because this is a country that has historically struggled with gender parity, especially when it comes to leadership roles right at the top. So for Takaichi to become the prime minister would be a major symbolic victory for Japanese women. But beyond the symbolism, what are the challenges that she faces if she comes into office? And how will she reshape the security infrastructure of East Asia? Let's put some of these questions to my guest, Mr. Benoit Hardy-Chartran, who is a lecturer at the Temple University in Japan. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to Firstpost.
Thank you very much.
We're reading a lot about this new Prime Minister designate, Sanae Takaichi. We hear that she was a former drummer, that she's a fan of Margaret Thatcher, she's a disciple of Shinzo Abe. Just give us in brief what the story is in Japan about this new Prime Minister who's coming into office.
Yes, indeed. The likely future Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, has quite an interesting background. As you mentioned, she used to be a musician, played drum in a heavy metal band. She is somebody now who's been a long-standing figure in Japanese politics. She was first elected in 1993, so it's been more than 30 years now. And her profile has really risen over the last few years, especially since former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who was assassinated in 2022, he took her under his wing. He was one of the biggest supporters of Takaichi, so that really helped her build a higher profile. And she's tried for the last couple of years to increase her profile in Japan within the party even more. She was one of the contenders in the previous leadership race in the LDP. And now at the age of 64, she's finally reaching her dream and becoming, or it's not yet official, but it's almost certainly that she's going to be the next prime minister, which is going to be made official on October 15th. So indeed will be an important day for Japan and a symbolic day as well, because as you said in your introduction, she will be the first female prime minister of Japan.
Right. Now, this is a country that has had prime ministers since the 1880s, and yet here we are almost 140 years later about to elect the first female prime minister. Takaichi herself tried twice in 2021 and last year to clinch the leadership, but she could not. But this time she succeeded. What do you think is the reason for that? Is Japan finally saying that, yes, we are ready for a female prime minister? Or is this a case of the right person at the right time for the job and just the coincidence that she's also a woman? Which of these is?
It's definitely the second one. She happens to be at the right place at the right time. She's seen by the party as the right person at this time. It's not yet a matter of Japan feeling ready for having a female prime minister. That could be the case, but we simply do not know yet, because let's remember that it is the LDP lawmakers, as well as about 1 million of their members, who voted for her as the leader of the party. Therefore, we won't know exactly how the Japanese population feels about her until the next election, which might only come in a few years. So as far as the reason why she became the leader of the party now, she is quite conservative. She is quite a nationalist, which might have an impact on relations with neighbors. We can talk about that later. But she was seen as the most likely candidate within the party to unite the party and to perhaps bring back the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, back to a stronger position in parliament. Because let's keep in mind that one of the biggest reasons why the previous prime minister, Ishiba, was not able to stay in power, decided to step down, is that the last two elections have been disastrous for the LDP as they lost their majority in both houses of the parliament. So the party is hanging its hopes on Takaichi, that she can bring back the party to its dominating position that it has had in Japanese politics for almost the whole post-war period since 1945.
So the next step is obviously the test in parliament, where the MPs will vote, the lawmakers will vote, and if she gets a majority, she officially becomes the Prime Minister of Japan. Like you mentioned, the LDP does not have a majority anymore like it used to in the past decade. So who are they banking on for support to ensure that Takaichi does pass the parliamentary test?
Absolutely. Well, so in previous elections or in previous cases when something like this happened, it was not a problem at all for the LDP to get its candidate or to get its president or its leader to become the prime minister because they simply held a majority in the House. So that's not the issue now. So that's not the case now. So they have to make sure they get the support of the other parties. Now, here's the thing. Technically, the other parties that together hold a majority in the House, they could present an alternative to Takaichi. They could present their own candidate if they manage to unify being behind one particular leader. However, that has not been the case. None of the opposition parties have been able to agree on fielding one particular candidate to defeat Takaichi. And therefore, they won't be able to defeat her, but she still has, as you mentioned rightfully, to get some support outside of the LDP. Now, they will get support from the Komeito because that is their coalition partner. So they will be voting in favor of Takaichi. And they will likely also be able to get a few votes here and there from other parties, probably some more conservative, right-leaning parties, in order to get Takaichi to get at least a simple majority. So that means over 50% within the Japanese Diet. And she will then be confirmed as the prime minister. So it's not a done deal. But because the opposition is not unified, almost certain that she will become prime minister.
Right. So it's almost certain that she will be prime minister, which then makes you wonder what sort of a prime minister she will be. We know that she is a fan of Margaret Thatcher, a highly divisive figure in the UK, and she's also a disciple of the late Abe Shinzo, the former prime minister of Japan. What sort of a prime minister do you expect her to be? Is she seen as a consensus builder? Is she seen as someone who centralizes power and shapes the government in her image? What sort of a leader is she?
Well, so it's difficult to say. First, because, of course, leaders, once they get to power, often take a different position than they were as candidates. This is a story that is as old as day. We've often had politicians campaigning in a certain way and then leading in a very different way. Now, of course, we can see hints to the way that she wants to govern. We know, for example, that she is quite conservative on social issues. She is somebody, even though she is a woman, which is a very important new step in Japanese politics. She is not in any way a feminist. She's somebody who has very nationalistic views when it comes to Japanese power, to the Japanese position in the region. For example, she has supported visit to Yasukuni Shrine, which is a shrine in Tokyo where some war criminals that were responsible for the devastation of World War II, where their souls are still enshrined. So if she happens to visit that shrine, which she has done in the past, that may revive important tensions with South Korea or with China, for example, that have both suffered at the hands of Japan during World War II. Now, in terms of domestic politics, in terms of the economy, she is conservative, but she is a fiscal dove, which means that she wants to spend money. She wants to stimulate the economy, will be investing in several critical sectors in order to help the economy grow, which frankly has been relatively stagnant over the last few years.
Right. You mentioned her military and security and foreign policy ideology there, and I also read somewhere that she's in favor of rewriting the pacifist constitution of Japan. Do you think that's something that the Japanese population also shares in her vision, or is this something that's unique to her side of the polity?
Well, that's quite interesting because Takaichi in the past indeed has supported amending the Constitution, especially to alter Article 9. Article 9 is the pacifist clause within the Japanese Constitution, which prevents Japan from having a proper armed forces. Japan now officially has self-defense forces rather than armed forces. She and several other conservatives within the party always have held the dream to be able to amend the Constitution, which would help Japan normalize basically its foreign and defense policies and have a proper normal army. Now, your question was about whether the Japanese population is in support of that. Over the last 5 to 10 years, because the security situation about Japan, around Japan, because the environment has become more dangerous, more tense, with tensions with, for example, North Korea, tensions with China, tensions with the South China Sea, and also, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This has contributed to a feeling in Tokyo, a sentiment in Tokyo, where people are more supportive of a stronger role from Japan on the security front. Surveys have shown that the majority of Japanese people are indeed supportive of a greater role of Japan increasing its military capabilities. Now, will they support a change to the constitution, which they value very much? The pacifist view is quite widespread in the Japanese population. That's a different story, but they're certainly, in my view, more open to the idea now than they would have been maybe 10 years ago because of the more tense international and regional environment.
Right. Now, if she's elected, Takaichi does have a couple of important foreign policy assignments coming up. She'll have to attend the ASEAN summit there as a participant, and she'll also be hosting Donald Trump later on in Japan. So there's a lot of focus on her foreign policy. And let's focus on China for now. How do you see her approach Beijing? As you mentioned, she is a nationalist, so she's talked about amending the pacifist constitution. So do you see her perhaps indulging in more military drills in the South China Sea or sending more voyages to contentious water, maybe deepening the military cooperation with America? How do you see her govern if she is elected as Prime Minister?
Yeah, this is a key question for me because the Japan-China relation is the most important relation in the region, the most important bilateral relation, and stabilizing the relations has been a goal of both many Japanese politicians, but also Chinese politicians. And whether or not her very, I'd say, nationalist, more conservative agenda leads to more tensions with China is the most important question. She is, because of her nationalist positions, nationalist credentials, if she goes on with, for example, trying to amend the Japanese constitution, this is going to lead to quite a backlash from China. Every time the Japanese government has done or taken any steps to amend or to change the constitution, or any time they've taken steps to play a larger role in the region, the reaction from China has been quite strong. Also from other countries, but mainly from China. So if she goes on, that might affect negatively the relations with the most important neighbor of Japan. Also, if she decides to send more self-defense forces to the South China Sea, which I mentioned is an area of a lot of tensions, but it's an important part of the region for Japan because these maritime lanes are extremely important for the economy of Japan. So if she decides to send more military assets in that region, that will also worsen relations with Japan. So I'm very keen to see what she'll do there, but I do hope that whatever she does, that we don't go back to a kind of cycle of escalation as we have seen a few times in the past with China.
Right. What about the Indo-Pacific? Because her mentor, the late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, was a huge proponent of closer cooperation in the Indo-Pacific with like-minded democracies, and he was a leading figure in this close relationship that we see between India and Japan. Do you see her continuing her focus on that, specific to India?
I do think so. I do think so. Because as you said, I mean, her mentor was Abe Shinzo, who is the originator. He is the father of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. In fact, it was in a speech to the Indian Parliament that he spoke about that. I believe it was around 2007. For Abe Shinzo, the relations between India and Japan were extremely important. In fact, the relations flourished between India and Japan since Abe has been in power. I have no reason to believe that Prime Minister Takaichi, when she becomes Prime Minister, changes her view on not only the importance of relations with Japan, but also the importance for Japan to continue playing a bigger role in the region, strengthening relations with other established democracies in the region, whether it is Australia, of course the United States, its ally, and other partners like South Korea. So she's always indicated that she wants to continue in that direction. So that's what we have to expect. So I do think that we're going to continue to see a strengthening of relations between India and Japan, as well as a greater role for Japan in the Indo-Pacific region.
Sure. Now, all of this is incumbent, of course, on her first managing to become Prime Minister and then managing to win back the trust of the voters for herself and her party, because the LDP is going through a very difficult time. And we have been reading about a certain new chapter in Japanese politics where there's a lot of talk about, say, immigration, and an attitude that is hostile towards outsiders, and even far-right parties emerging on the scene. Do you feel that the emergence of this new type of politics in Japan is perhaps pushing even mainstream parties closer towards the right?
This is certainly my view and my view of many other observers of the Japanese political scene. There's been a certain degree of malaise, of disenchantment or dissatisfaction in Japanese society over the last few years over, for example, the very large number of tourists, that international tourists that Japan is getting these days, and also over immigration, which is important to mention is still quite low in Japan. It's less than 3% of the overall population. But because there is a certain malaise and anxiety in Japanese population, some parties, right-wing parties, have taken advantage of that and have made some gains in recent elections. And indeed, when the ruling party, the LDP, sees this, sees how these parties have been performing, there is indeed a tendency for many of these LDP politicians to kind of play to those fears. And we have seen in the last few months Takaichi and other LDP politicians kind of playing up or playing on these fears and feeding into that kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric. Not to the same extent as other parties, but you still heard it. So indeed, they seem to be pulled a little bit in that direction in the current environment.
Finally, let me just ask you about what the future holds for Takaichi and for the LDP, because we've seen a musical chair of prime ministers in the last couple of years. One comes in and before you know it, he calls a snap election and he's gone. Do you see some sort of stability returning now that Takaichi has been elected prime minister? Are the divisions within the coalition fine? Is the public slowly returning trust to the LDP? What's the overall scenario there?
Well, stability has certainly been the biggest issue in Japanese politics ever since Abe left office. We've seen a succession of prime ministers. I think Takaichi, if I'm not mistaken, will be the fourth prime minister since Abe left power, which is only 4 years ago. So if she managed, the only way she can manage to kind of put an end to that cycle of instability is, one, managing to unite the party behind her, two, being able to work with opposition parties, given that her party is in the minority, and three, regaining the trust of the Japanese population, and that is far from being certain. There have been a few scandals in the last few years in the LDP, and that's going to be really key for her. If she manages to unite more people and kind of regain the trust by having a kind of new style of politics, perhaps, she might be able to put an end to that period of instability, but I wouldn't bet on it yet.
Right. I think the next couple of weeks are going to be interesting because Takaichi will face the parliament, and if she is confirmed as prime minister, then she will begin a new chapter in Japanese politics, hopefully of stability. But thank you so much, Mr. Benoit Hardy-Chartran, for speaking to us on First
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Want the facts?
The latest developments?
News that gets straight to the point.
Well, we've got all three just for you. This is Firstpost Live, a brand new show, your window into what really matters.
Don't miss it.